begin. I thought about it. I've been at Grace just less than 3 years now. And there's been the Aurora, Colorado shootings. There has been the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. There has been the Boston Marathon bombing. It seems like violent tragedies are getting compressed closer and closer together in our nation. And then right across the street from the church, there's this attempted murder, something about a drug deal. It almost sounds like being the person came from just outside Chicago in the Rockford area. Almost sounds like somebody was sent here to settle some things with those who are the suppliers from outside of the area. And then there's this, well, goofy dictator, I guess you could say, halfway around the world who just keeps talking about wanting to launch a nuclear weapon. All this as if the natural disasters and the floods and the accidents like the explosion in Waco, Texas aren't enough for us to cope with. Then there are these people in the midst of life who want to wreak further devastation. And I look down at my imaginary WWJD bracelet, and it's not clear what Jesus would do immediately. It's not clear how Jesus would solve the world's ills or ask us to. But today's scripture readings kind of lead us to practices that will help God heal our inner ills. 2,000 years ago, in a city called Joppa, there was a lovely woman. Her name was Tabitha. The Greek for it meant gazelle. And if you had in your life an especially kind grandmotherly person, or if you had a teacher that always seemed to have the right words of encouragement to speak, never seemed to let discouragement come from his or her lips, always seemed to be able to calm the kids when they got uptight with one another, then you kind of know a Tabitha-like person in your life. This particular Tabitha was also a seamstress. She made coats, she made shirts, and it implies that she made those and repaired those and gave them out to others who were in need. And if you've read or heard the story of Jesus entering a room of a little girl that was dead, and if you remember that he spoke the words, Talitha Kumi, which means little girl, get up, and you're drawn more deeply into this story. Because in the midst of the sorrow, in the midst of the loss of this lovely woman, this compassionate woman, Peter remembered Talitha Kumi. And he asked everyone to leave the room. And he knelt by Tabitha's body, just like Jesus did this little girl's body. This gazelle that had fallen under the lion's paw of death. And he began to pray. A Presbyterian pastor, better known as Mr. Rogers, once said, when I was a boy and I would see scary things on the news, my mom would say, look for the helpers. And that would comfort me. The people tending the wounded in Boston, the people lifting their prayers across the nation for the survivors, and for the police and the FBI and the federal marshals in their job of standing in harm's way and searching out the bombers. They are helpers. Those who have gathered at Sandbag Central, those who will be putting out the bags and making the sandwiches and checking in on neighbors, they are helpers. After the attempted murder across the street, when the news crew was here and when the police were all gathered, Bob Hanna went out. And he invited them in to Lenten soup supper. They didn't come in, but it was a way of saying, not only are we thinking about you, but you're welcome here. And it got in the paper the next day that the soup supper and the worship still went on. It was a way of saying, even in the midst of an attempted murder just across the street, life and hope and the story of God with us is still going on. We will have this morning, I don't know what I did with mine now, but as you go through the line for your refreshments. There will be packets there that tell you what goes into a flood bucket. A flood bucket costs $55. I understand Moorhead at Grace Church had distributed those. Church I was at, we got 250 of those to distribute into the community. There's a whole list of the items that go into that. We're hoping at Grace to be able to create some flood buckets or give money toward them. The warehouses are running low, the United Methodist Committee on Relief warehouses. And it may be a case where we need some here as well. So take a look at those. That is another way of providing help. I remember giving out those flood buckets, and it was like not just a flood bucket, it was the first sign, because cleaning materials are very helpful after a flood. It was the first sign that someday things would be back to normal. That God was indeed working through and with other people in the midst of a disaster. And the human spirit needs signs that we follow a God who can bring new life. Last Monday, in between the snows, we had a funeral service for Howard Payton. It was planned on the 15th of April so his family could travel up without worrying about the weather. Anyway, I was sitting with one of Howard's sons, and we were talking, and all of a sudden, there was this moment when Howard's son was overwhelmed. Overwhelmed by all the people in the kitchen, and the people coming out and serving, and all the care of the church. And it just kind of put a knot in his throat. And who are all these people? And how do we thank them? The ministry of moving chairs and washing plates and cups is no small thing. It's just one more sign that God uses the helpers of this world to provide comfort. Paul had just got back from spending a week at Stephen Minister's training to learn the nuances of the art of care and prayer so that now she's a certified teacher of them. Just one more sign that God is sending helpers into the world. Peter knelt beside Tabitha's lifeless body as one of those helpers. And Peter prayed, Tabitha Kumi, which means, beautiful dear, get up. One of the translations of the Gospel of John translates Jesus' words to his followers as this. I know my followers. They are putting their feet in my footsteps. They are putting their feet in my footsteps. I want to be part of they. I imagine you want to be part of they, those who put your feet in Jesus' footsteps. And every time we are helpers in any way, shape, or form, we are putting our feet in Jesus' footsteps. And it may not change the world, but it changes us a bit inside. And it changes those closest to us. And it whispers hope to the hurting. And that's no small thing. Where are the helpers? I invite you to remember some of those in the Boston Marathon even, that just finished the race, exhausted, made their way first thing to the hospital tent and gave their blood for those who were wounded, that they may start the process of recovery and have life. Celebrate the helpers. Peter prayed, Tabitha Kumi, and the lovely deer did get up. And the community drew near to Peter. They wanted to know more of God's love. They believed, were baptized. Where will we choose to put our feet in Jesus' footsteps?